The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Klein Eck, a modest café tucked between a second-hand bookstore and a laundromat in Berlin's Prenzlauer Berg district. The establishment had seen better days: mismatched chairs, faded wallpaper depicting pastoral scenes, and a coffee machine that wheezed like an old accordion. But it possessed something increasingly rare in the gentrifying neighborhood: authenticity. Klaus Müller wiped down the same table for the third time, his movements sharp with irritation. At 32, he carried the weight of accumulated disappointments like stones in his pockets. Once, he'd dreamed of opening his own restaurant, of creating culinary experiences that would make people weep with joy. Instead, he found himself serving overpriced sandwiches to tourists and trust fund artists who treated the working class like part of the decor. The bell above the door chimed, and Klaus looked up to see a figure in a weathered baseball cap and an oversized jacket that had seen too many washings. The man's beard was unkempt, his jeans worn thin at the knees, and he carried himself with the hunched shoulders of someone trying to take up as little space as possible. Another vagrant, Klaus thought, his jaw tightening. They'd been coming more frequently lately, drawn by the café's reputation for tolerance and the owner's soft heart. Mrs. Hoffman, bless her soul, never turned anyone away, but Klaus had grown tired of the parade of drifters who nursed a single cup of coffee for hours while real customers waited for tables. The man approached the counter, scanning the handwritten menu board with careful attention. Klaus crossed his arms and adopted his most professional tone, the one that managed to be both polite and dismissive. "Can I help you?" he asked, letting just enough edge creep into his voice to establish boundaries. The stranger looked up, and for a moment, Klaus was struck by something familiar in those eyes: green, intense, with laugh lines that suggested someone who smiled often. But the recognition flickered and died, overwhelmed by Klaus's assumptions about the man's appearance. "I'd like the schnitzel, please," the man said quietly, his English accented with something that might have been American. "And a coffee." Klaus snorted. "The schnitzel? That's €18. Maybe you'd prefer something more, within your budget? We have soup for €4. The man's expression didn't change, though something shifted behind his eyes, not anger, but a kind of weary understanding. "The schnitzel is fine. And maybe some of that apple strudel in the case there. Maybe you'd like some caviar to go with it, friend?" Klaus's voice dripped with sarcasm. "This isn't a fast food place where you can linger all day. We're running a business here." A few other customers glanced up from their newspapers, sensing the tension. An elderly woman at a corner table frowned disapprovingly at Klaus's tone, but he was beyond caring. He'd had enough of people who thought they could treat his workplace like a charity. The man in the cap simply nodded and reached into his jacket pocket, producing a worn leather wallet. He counted out the exact amount in cash, adding a modest tip, and found a small table by the window. Klaus prepared the order with mechanical efficiency, his movements betraying his mood. He slammed the plate down a little too hard when he delivered it, coffee sloshing onto the saucer. The customer didn't complain, didn't even look up from his contemplation of the rain-streaked window. For the next hour, the man ate slowly, deliberately, as if each bite required careful consideration. He pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook and began writing, occasionally pausing to watch the pedestrians hurrying past outside. There was something almost meditative about his presence, a stillness that seemed to calm the café's usual bustle. Klaus found himself stealing glances, his irritation gradually giving way to curiosity. The man's hands were soft, uncalloused, not the hands of someone who'd spent years on the streets. His posture, when he thought no one was looking, straightened with a confidence that didn't match his humble appearance. And there was something about the way he held his pen, the careful formation of letters on the page, that suggested education, refinement even. As the afternoon wore on, Klaus noticed other details that didn't fit his initial assessment. When the man answered his phone, a brief, quiet conversation in what sounded like fluent German, his voice carried an authority that seemed at odds with his appearance. He spoke to someone about the project and meeting with the director tomorrow, terms that made Klaus wonder if perhaps this wasn't just another vagrant after all. The mystery deepened when a young woman burst through the cafe door, shaking rain from her designer coat. She scanned the room frantically until her eyes landed on the man by the window. Relief flooded her face as she hurried over to his table. "There you are," she exclaimed in heavily accented English. "I've been looking everywhere. The car is waiting, and you have that interview with Der Spiegel in an hour." The man looked up calmly from his notebook. "I told you I needed some time alone, Sarah. Just to think, to observe. But the schedule. The schedule can wait 5 more minutes, he said gently but firmly. This is important too. Klaus pretended to wipe down nearby tables, straining to overhear their conversation. The woman, Sarah, was clearly agitated, checking her phone repeatedly and glancing toward the door as if expecting paparazzi to burst in at any moment. "You can't just disappear like that," she whispered urgently. "Do you know how many people are looking for you? The hotel manager nearly had a panic attack when they couldn't find you this morning." The man chuckled softly. "I left a note. I said I was going for a walk." "A walk? In this neighborhood? Dressed like?" She gestured helplessly at his attire. "Like a normal person? Like someone who doesn't want to be recognized?" Klaus felt his heart skip a beat. Recognized? He studied the man's profile more carefully, trying to place those distinctive features beneath the beard and cap. There was something maddeningly familiar about him, like a word on the tip of his tongue that refused to form. The woman sat down across from the man, lowering her voice even further. "The premiere is tomorrow night. Everyone's expecting you to." "I know what everyone expects," the man interrupted gently. "But sometimes it's good to remember what it feels like to be treated like everyone else. To sit in a place like this and just exist." He gestured around the cafe with obvious affection. "Look at this place, Sarah. Really look at it. The owner has probably run this cafe for decades, serving people who work real jobs, who don't have assistants or bodyguards or people managing their every move. There's something honest about it." Klaus felt a flush of embarrassment as he remembered his earlier behavior. The man had been seeking authenticity, normalcy, and Klaus had responded with judgment and rudeness. Sarah glanced around the cafe with barely concealed disdain. "It's very quaint. But we really do need to go. The journalist flew in specifically to meet with you." "Of course." The man closed his notebook and tucked it into his jacket pocket. "Just let me finish here." As Sarah waited by the door, clearly uncomfortable in the modest surroundings, Klaus watched the man in the cap with new eyes. The way he moved, the careful attention he paid to his surroundings, the thoughtful pauses before he spoke, it all suggested someone accustomed to being watched, studied, analyzed. Someone who had learned to find moments of peace in unexpected places. Mrs. Hoffman emerged from the kitchen, her silver hair pinned back in its usual neat bun. At 73, she'd run the cafe for 40 years, and little escaped her notice. "Who's our friend by the window?" she asked Klaus, nodding toward the man. "Nobody special," Klaus replied. "Just another drifter who thinks he can make himself at home." Mrs. Hoffman studied the customer with the shrewd eyes of someone who'd seen every type of person Berlin had to offer. "He doesn't look like a drifter to me." "Look at his shoes, Klaus. Expensive leather, well maintained. And that jacket, it's worn, yes, but it's good quality. Designer, unless I miss my guess." Klaus glanced over, seeing the man with fresh eyes. She was right, the details he dismissed as shabby now seemed deliberately chosen, a careful construction of ordinariness. "Maybe he's slumming," Klaus muttered. "Rich kid playing at being poor." "Or maybe," Mrs. Hoffman said gently, "he's someone who values being treated like a human being rather than a celebrity." Before Klaus could ask what she meant, the man at the window closed his notebook and approached the counter. He moved with a fluid grace that reminded Klaus of something, an actor, perhaps, though he couldn't place where he might have seen him. The meal was excellent, the man said, his voice warm with genuine appreciation. Please give my compliments to the chef. I am the chef, Klaus replied automatically, then felt foolish for the admission. Then you have real talent. The schnitzel was perfectly tender, and the seasoning on the potatoes. The man paused, searching for words. It reminded me of a place my grandmother used to take me in Munich. Simple food, made with care. Despite himself, Klaus felt a flush of pride. He'd learned those recipes from his own grandmother, had spent years perfecting the balance of herbs and the timing required for the perfect crust. Thank you, Klaus said, his voice softer now. I apologize for earlier. It's been a difficult day. The man smiled, and for a moment, Klaus saw past the beard and the cap to something radiant beneath. We all have difficult days. It's how we choose to end them that matters. He reached into his jacket and pulled out something, not his wallet, but a thick envelope. He placed it on the counter next to a small piece of paper, folded once. This is for you, the man said simply. And for Mrs. Hoffman, and for keeping places like this alive in a world that doesn't value them enough. Before Klaus could respond, the man was gone, the bell above the door marking his departure with a gentle chime. Klaus stared at the envelope, afraid to touch it, as if it might disappear like a mirage. Mrs. Hoffman appeared at his shoulder. Well? Are you going to open it? With trembling fingers, Klaus lifted the flap. Inside were €100 bills, more than he'd ever seen at once. He counted quickly, then counted again, certain he'd made a mistake. €10,000, he whispered. Mrs. Hoffman picked up the folded paper and read aloud, "To judge is easy. To serve is an art." They stood in silence, the weight of the moment settling around them like snow. Klaus thought of his harsh words, his assumptions, his eagerness to dismiss someone based on appearance alone. He thought of his own dreams, deferred but not abandoned, and the kindness of a stranger who'd seen something worth nurturing in a bitter waiter at a forgotten cafe. Who was he? Klaus asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. Mrs. Hoffman smiled, her eyes twinkling with the satisfaction of a puzzle solved. Someone who understands that the most important performances happen off-camera. The next morning, the Berlin tabloids would run a small story about Leonardo DiCaprio's mysterious charitable gesture at a local cafe, complete with grainy photos taken through rain-streaked windows. But by then, Klaus would have already made his decision. He used part of the money to pay off his culinary school debts, part to help Mrs. Hoffman modernize the cafe's equipment, and part to establish a small fund for other struggling food service workers in the neighborhood. But most importantly, he used the lesson. Klein Eck became known not just for its authentic German cuisine, but for the way every customer was treated, with dignity, respect, and the understanding that everyone carries invisible stories worth honoring. Klaus never again made assumptions based on appearance alone, and he trained his staff to see each person who walked through their doors as someone deserving of their best service. Years later, when food critics and travel writers would ask Klaus about the transformation of his humble cafe into one of Berlin's most beloved establishments, he would simply smile and point to a small framed note behind the register: "To judge is easy. To serve is an art." Sometimes the most profound lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. And sometimes, the greatest gift we can give is not money or recognition, but the simple act of seeing people as they truly are, not the roles they play or the clothes they wear, but the human beings beneath, deserving of kindness, respect, and the chance to surprise us with their depth. Klaus never saw the man in the cap again, but he carried the lesson forward every day, transforming not just his own life, but the lives of everyone who entered his cafe. In a world quick to judge and slow to understand, Klein Eck became a sanctuary where authenticity was valued above all else, a place where the art of service flourished, nurtured by the memory of a rainy afternoon and an encounter that changed everything. The rain had stopped by the time Klaus locked up that night, and the stars were beginning to appear through the clearing clouds. He looked up at them and whispered a thank you to whoever might be listening, for second chances, for unexpected teachers, and for the reminder that true wealth isn't measured in euros, but in the connections we make and the kindness we choose to share. In the years that followed, the story would be retold countless times, each version slightly different but carrying the same essential truth, that dignity costs nothing to give but everything to withhold, and that sometimes the most important moments in our lives come disguised as ordinary encounters with extraordinary people. The legacy of that rainy afternoon lived on in every meal served with love, every customer treated with respect, and every young waiter trained to see beyond the surface to the human heart beating beneath. And though Klaus never knew for certain who his mysterious benefactor had been, he understood that some gifts transcend their givers, becoming part of something larger, a chain of kindness that stretches across time, connecting us all in our shared humanity. Thank you for watching. I hope you all enjoy this video and learned a lesson. I would be grateful for your likes. Also don't forget to subscribe and comment on the video. See you soon.